Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about domestic violence and the way that it has recently, we've come across, a lot of cases, more awareness. A lot of that has to do with the media, but also with the way things are globally and the way things are, whether they're actually changing all over the world with the Me Too movement, and then again followed by actually internationally an outcry against violence, particularly violence against women, domestic violence. We'll be talking about the impact on society as a whole, the role the media has to play, whether the laws presently in Pakistan and even internationally are enough to deal with this kind of violence, and whether when it comes out, when we find out, whether it's too late in a lot of cases. We'll be talking about that also. I have with me Malia Hussain, who's a social activist. Thank you for being with us today. Waqas Salim, who's an anthropologist. Thank you for joining us. And Barrister Safiullah Ghori, who's our legal expert for today. Thank you for being with us. Malia, of course, it's not a new issue for you, and of course, it's not a new issue for any of us. As far as our society is concerned, we've been dealing with this issue for a long time. But it has been, it has come out as more recently with known cases, and because of that, other cases have also come to light globally also, not just within Pakistan. But that, of course, highlights areas where we're still lacking. In your opinion, how are things presently? Do you think they've improved? Do you think people, and particularly women, are more aware of their rights at this time? And even those who are they willing to pass and, go through, circumvent the social taboos to actually move forward and speak out against this kind of violence?
Yeah. I see a very positive change in our society. We, like people from our generation, have been working on these issues since, if I remember correctly, 1990 in Pakistan, when Dr. Fawzia Saeed started the first crisis center in Pakistan, in Islamabad, just to work on domestic violence. Before that, I don't remember anybody talking about it. And the idea was to encourage people to address this issue, start talking about it, so that somebody can help you and do something about it. So since 1990, it's been almost 30 years. The trend has slowly changed. It is still changing, but young girls, young women, they have started talking about it. Even though it's still a taboo topic in our society, there is stigma attached to it, but still, girls are gathering courage somehow, and they have started reporting cases, which I look at as a very, so it's not like there's more domestic violence or violence against women happening. We hear about it more because more women have started talking about it.
You don't think it's increased, it's just
No,
that we've
not at
become
all.
more aware of
Not at
it,
all.
it's come out in
Yes.
the open more.
Yes, they've started talking about it. So unless and until we talk about these things, how can we resolve them? So this is the first step in the right direction.
But it's not enough, clearly. How do we...
First step in the right direction
Yes,
is the most difficult step. Talking
Right.
about it, yes, we need laws. We have some laws. There are some laws that need amendment. Like there is a law in our PPC on hurt. All we need to do is include households in that law.
Right.
There is punishment for hurting
You're saying
somebody.
that there are maybe, places where amendments need to be made within the law.
Yes.
To perhaps deal with situations
We
of
do
domestic
have some
violence.
laws. Some provinces have done a very good job of making laws, like Sindh has a very good law.
Punjab, I believe.
to-
I think I'll go to Safiullah with that, the legal side
Punjab
of it. But
and Balochistan are not as good as the one. See, Sindh criminalizes domestic violence. Punjab and
Doesn't.
Balochistan, they don't. Even though, again, I'd say it's a step in the right direction, but we need to do a lot more as far as legislation.
But do you think as a society, before I move on, Waqas, do you think as a society we condemn this kind of violence enough? Considering that, it's the social taboos that are involved, and also the acceptance. I mean, I don't think I'd be wrong to say that there is a level of acceptance of this kind of violence within our society, and in all segments of our society. This much is all right, and this much will make it too much, and so there is so therefore in part we're accepting it a little bit, but when it becomes too much, then perhaps somebody needs to do something about it.
Marukh, as in society, still we are a patriarchal society, and in patriarchy, we generally are living in a state of false consciousness, and where we actually do not have an idea in certain cases that this segment or this part of or this act actually falls in the ambit of violence.
Right.
For instance, if we will be talking about issues of inheritance.
Right.
So if you're depriving a woman of the inheritance, that is somehow violence. That is somehow depriving a woman of her rights. And then if you're talking about reproductive rights, that is a different domain. If you'll go to the rights of emotional and psychological abuse, I mean, that is not even considered as an abuse. And then we generally considered abuse, physical abuse, if somebody is beating someone.
Right, I want to come to that. Maybe like, Amelia is saying, physical abuse has gained prominence because people have started coming out. But what about psychological abuse? That's very much a part of
Equally
violence.
bad. Yes.
And it has very lasting impacts, and more detrimental in some cases, because
Yes,
physically you
that is
heal
true. Yeah.
quicker. What about
Financial violence is another one.
financial violence? Let me come back and talk about that more, but legal side of it, Safiullah, how do you see things? Do you think we are, as women, domestic violence pertains largely to women, so that side of that segment of our society, do you think our laws protect women enough?
That's a very good question, Manukh, and yes, I believe that they do. I am now of the impression that there has been a lot of legislation that is at par with international standards.
Right.
Things I've read, for instance, laws in the US, and ours are almost similar. You were referring just a while ago to physical violence and to psychological violence. Our laws go far beyond the call of duty by not only including psychological, but even including cybercrime, including things such as stalking, such as ghosting. These are terms that you do not even find in Western societies as yet, that we already have in Pakistan. And we've come a long way, because first we had the Protection of Women's Act 2006. This was the initial amendment of the PPC and the CRPC.
Right.
After that, we had this tremendously controversial bill, which was the Domestic Violence Bill 2009, which was tabled by Yasmin Rahman, and that bill could not pass. It actually lapsed. But then all of it changed when we finally had the Domestic Violence Act 2012, and as Malia Sahib has already stated, we have a lot of provincial laws, excellent provincial laws that cover just about everything, with the exception of KPK, which does not have any laws. We have similar laws in Sindh and Balochistan, and then we have an updated version of these laws in Punjab, which create crisis centers, which create more, which as a matter of fact place a liability on women police officers to go and ensure better investigation. There is also laws that shorten the time period for courts to 90 days for resolving domestic and any sort of domestic violence issues. But the central problem here is very different. It's not legal. There are societies that have much lesser laws than we do, but Pakistan ranks as the third most dangerous place in the world for women. And I think a large part of that has to do with our culture. Our culture is constantly subjugating one gender over the other. And the real conversation I believe that we should be having today is that where we have all these laws that criminalize domestic violence, and it's not just even about domestic violence, it's about violence in general. So we have laws that criminalize violence, and yet we have
a society that accepts it.
And we have a state organ called the Council of Islamic Ideology that states that you can beat up your spouse, but lightly beat her. And if our very state organ that is responsible for at least giving a semblance of what our religion is going out to the public and telling the public that it's all right to beat your women as long as you're just doing it lightly, as long as the stick is not thicker than 2 fingers. If these are the kind of debates that we continue to have, I strongly doubt that we will have any progress whatsoever on any domestic violence issues.
How do we move forward?
So I believe that the first step to move forward would be to introduce religion into our legislations and explain that it is something that is perhaps not permissible in Islam. As long as we keep mixing up two constant theories, there is one there's one whole ideology within the people of Pakistan who believe that there is the law, but the law is a Western import, and then they believe there is Sharia. And because we have not been able to update our Sharia, and because a lot of people still believe that it is binding upon them, they believe that it is something that is permissible to them, and it allows them in various forms and ways. So this is the starting point for us to believe that that we need to update our Sharia. And then there is another important aspect of all of this, and this is just the general idea of toxic masculinity and the idea of dominance. I believe that violence in our societies starts at a very young age, when parents believe it's okay to chastise their children by perhaps beating them up physically or even emotionally chastising them. And it is this very accepted norm in our society that then continues and takes up the form of domestic violence as those very children grow up. Because as those children grow up, they split into the men and the women. The men continue to believe that it is their duty to chastise their wives or their children or other weaker only in muscular strength, by the way.
But Safiullah, I'll talk about the social aspect of this more, but don't you think the problem is also about enforcement? I mean, we talk about laws, yes, but how many people come forward? Which goes back to the thing that, the society accepts violence.
Excellent question. So here's what the central problem is. I believe that the laws are sufficient. But even where the Act, for instance, says that the matter is to be resolved in 90 days, it never really is resolved in 90 days. And that's not because of any other reason but the fact that we don't have enough judges. It's the same problem, for instance, in the Land Grabbers Act, where it says that it needs to be resolved in 90 days, but no land grabbing issue is resolved in 90 days either. We don't have enough judges. We need to strengthen our judiciary for us to conduct these courts properly.
I'll talk about more about the fact that enforcement is a huge problem. But Malia, enforcement will only become an issue after people get to that point. Women find the courage to access the system,
Right.
and of course it's more here, but to an extent we find that all over the world also, isn't it? True?
It is global because see, I think all the countries in the world today have a patriarchal system.
Right.
Where it's a male dominated society, women get blamed for whatever happens to them. So it's very important that if we want to address this issue, we need to change or shift people's mindset, where they can see that whoever is hurting the other person is at fault. Whoever is getting hurt, we need to protect that person, whether it's a man or a woman or a child or any vulnerable person in the household. So shifting the mindset of our people is very important.
Are we working towards that? Of course, socially, social media is, we have to acknowledge that a large, huge part of the fact that things are coming out, people are talking about it, has to do with media, whether it's social media
Right.
or, other media.
Social media depends on how people use it. Some people use it in a very responsible manner, others are very irresponsible about it. So it's all about how do people use it.
Right.
But when you talk about mainstream media, I think they have a huge responsibility. How do they educate people? And one aspect of it is these talk shows. But what people watch more are your films and your plays, your serials. So it's very important that we start adding these messages in mainstream media, things that people watch more. The other thing where we can actually make a difference, a huge difference, is our curriculum. If you add age-appropriate messages in your curriculum, small stories in Urdu books and English books where they talk about somebody beating up another family member and how it was taken care of. You're telling children that it's not all right to beat up your family members or anyone for that matter. And if it happens, what do? You don't have to start talking about laws, but
How do you
little
stop
stories.
stigmatizing the issue? How do you stop? Of course, a lot of that has to do with education, and that is a long-term solution for us as a society.
One generation, that's all it'll take. If we change our curriculum in all the classes, add positive messages, it'll take just one generation. When these children come out of the schools, they'll have a different mindset. That and media, and plus, wherever you can, adding these positive messages, like we're talking about it today. There's nothing wrong in saying that somebody misused me or violated me or beat me up.
But it's very easy to say that of course there isn't anything wrong. But for a woman to come forward, there is, you know, a huge emotional baggage that she carries, social
Yes.
baggage that she carries.
Yes.
For her to you know, circumvent all of these huge barriers and move forward, her family.
Yeah, see, yes, it is very difficult for women to speak out. Before they speak out, we have to create that space in our families and in the society, a safe space where women can actually, or whoever is violated, can actually speak out. And where they're not afraid of being judged, where they're not afraid of being stigmatized, which means that each and every one of us has to play our role in creating those safe spaces in our homes, in our families, among our friends, where people feel that it's all right for them to share their negative experiences, share that they were violated, and they're not afraid of being judged.
But Western
So-
societies, even there, you know, like I said, and Vikas, I'll go on to you, it's still a stigma there. You know, not as much a stigma as it is here. And it's not, you know, just about your, you know, lower classes, middle classes. It goes on, you know. And I'm sure you
Yeah,
have the
it's all
statistics where
classes,
it's
absolutely.
all over. How, and you know, of course, they're ahead of us by, you know, some 100 years or whatever. But as far as our society is concerned, how do we bridge this gap in as little time as possible? You know, Malia is saying it'll take one generation if you put it in the curriculum. But what do you think?
When it comes to changing or altering the social structure, I mean, it becomes a very complex process. One thing in isolation cannot achieve the objective. So, I mean, we have to go along on a mix of things. For instance, we have a legislation, and that legislation, what basically does is that it brings people out of the consciousness, and it inculcates in their mind that this is something that state criminalizing. And then on the other side, we have the media.
But nobody would go there, you know.
But-
People, even if I mean, if we talk about recent cases that are you know, creating some hype in the media, they have had to come to a certain level of abuse over the course of time for women to speak out.
Actually, in this case, one of the very important factor is of the role models. I mean, in a society, we have the concept of hero worship, we have the concept of role models, and
Right.
there are certain individuals who within themselves become agencies, and they start bringing change. For instance, there is a recent spat going on in the media about the issue of domestic violence, and if you look at the case, now it depends on the way states handles it. I mean, if that case is brought to the justice and it is concluded well before time or well in time, it will have an impact on the society. And then, for instance, as Amelia was talking about Dr. Fawzia Saeed, I mean, she has done a tremendous job. I mean, these are the people who are the role models. Then we have the case of Mukhtar Amai. She stood up against the violence. She is, I would rather say, she is an agent who become an agency. I mean, these are few of the people who
You're saying, and I
societies
agree,
follow.
I think it's a very important point that people see that there is justice and they see people, you know, who are actually perpetrators of such violence brought to justice. But for that, there are huge issues. Isn't that true, Safiullah? I mean, as far as our legal system is concerned, there are inherent issues, and I think we've talked about the problems with our legal system before also. They just don't limit, I mean, we can't limit them only to violence. That's all around. As far as, you know, delayed justice is concerned, the fact that, you know, justice often takes a long period of time. And this social media hype doesn't last that long.
Absolutely.
So for someone suffering, if they don't get, for other people, you know, looking at the stories, watching them, other women learning from this, perhaps finding the strength to come out, unless they see such perpetrators brought to justice, there will not be other women coming out. They will not find the courage.
I absolutely agree. And so this is just not a problem. Once again, it's not a problem with women alone. It's a problem generally with our legal system.
Right.
The fact that people are afraid of going to courts in order to resolve their problems, no matter what they may be. They might be related to domestic violence issues, but they could very well be related to property or contracts or anything else. And everybody goes through the same suffering. The going through a legal process itself is synonymous to the Pakistani public with suffering. And the only way this can change is if the people of Pakistan get together and start making an active effort to try and introduce more judges into the system, to try and introduce more legal education into our curriculums. So as was stated that
You're saying
it's-
people should do. How can people do that?
people obviously
That
by
effort has to come from
the
the
legislation,
government.
from the legislation. Of course, the parties then need to get together. They need to increase the funding of the courts. They need to appoint more
But
judges in the
Safiola,
High
we're
Court
talking
and in the
about a
Supreme
whole
Court.
rehaul. We're talking about
An
a whole
absolute rehaul is necessary.
of
Absolute
the justice
necessary.
system.
Absolutely. And with this present judicial system, as we have already discussed many times before, we have a Pakistan penal code that dates back to 1908. We have a CRPC that's dating back to 1863. These are legislations that are 150 to 200 years old. These are simply not made for our times.
But
And-
Safiola, we've had, I mean, okay, we've had some very, very competent judges. We've had, excellent judges of caliber that, of amazing caliber. But rather than picking up issues, they've picked up cases in some cases. Those cases have been resolved, but we are where we are as far as the legal system is concerned.
I think
Do you
this
think
is,
we
this
will
is some,
come
this is
to
a,
a
this is a
point-
place where I'll correct you. A lot of these cases have been guiding lights. So for instance, as far as cases when it comes to rights of women are concerned, there are cases. There's a recent judgment, for instance, by Mushir Alam, who states the rights of women. And as lawyers, we go and quote those judgments all the time. But cases are only guide and light posts.
That's what I'm trying to say,
Would you-
but we haven't come to that juncture where there is reform, the kind of reform that's needed within the system for people to find any sort of crime, to speak against any sort of crime, and the fact that the justice system itself is accessible to them.
Manav,
How will
I think
things
the question-
change unless
yeah,
people find that?
And so I think the question really then comes down to a very, very different question. So you say that there needs to be legislation, and I completely agree with you. But then perhaps we need to ask a question.
I'm not saying that there needs to be legislation.
The
I mean,
system
to
needs
correct
to
you,
be
I'm
needs to be-
saying there
okay.
needs to be reform.
There needs to be
judicial reform.
Okay, so let's pose another question. For instance, let's pose a question along the lines of the fact that why is it that KPK remains the only province that did not pass a domestic violence legislation?
Right.
Why is it that every single time any woman has put forward a bill in the KPK assembly stating that domestic violence should be criminalized, it has been met with tremendous outcry, not just from the legislators within the KPK assembly, but also by the public, who believe that by criminalizing domestic violence, you are going to increase the divorce rates, that you are going to somehow emancipate the women in a manner that is very detrimental to our society. So the real questions that we ought to be asking ourselves is, who are the people who oppose these changes? Everybody sitting on this panel agrees that there ought to be changes,
But they're
there
part
are,
of our society. These
yes,
people
and so these are
us.
there are people who actively disassociate themselves from such debates. And the real question is, how do we bring them into this debate? How do we get them to be a part of this entire issue
Don't
so
you
that
think
they
it's
too?
it's the responsibility of the state?
I believe that the state has already attempted to do so many times, but it is these people, a very small segment of people in some places and a larger segment in provinces like KPK, where they are simply not willing to discuss this. For them, this is not an issue. And so I'll reiterate that perhaps then the only way that we can do this is to go back to the roots of why we are not willing to discuss this. I think that the reason why we are not willing to discuss this is because we have a culture that is based on dominance. Where there are various institutions which try and dominate the state, where there are all the way down to a family, where there are members of a singular family that try and dominate extended family, down to a single unit. And this,
But Safiola, whether the family structure, the family oriented, I mean, I don't know what the right word for it is. Malia would probably be the right person to ask. When we talk about our family setup, our the way that families are built, our family culture, so to speak,
Right.
there are good points of it and there are bad points of it. And where violence is going on, sometimes there is intervention where it's needed, as opposed to couples living alone, and that there is, so
Right,
there are pros and
right,
cons of that
yes.
system. But in your opinion, don't you think a large part of people not accessing the legal system is their belief that they will find nothing from it?
Which brings us back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, that our legal system, our judicial system
Right.
needs to be reformed very
Right.
badly. when you know that if you go and file a case or report a case, it might take 3, 4, 5, even up to 10 years before you get justice. Yes, people are reluctant. They don't want to. The way they are treated in police stations, they don't want to go there.
Especially, you know, the way women are treated in police
Yeah,
stations, the way
right.
women are thought of, you know, when they're accessing.
Yes.
Let's not, you know, there are taboos.
Yes, there are. So again, I think I will come back to the same thing. I really believe in personal responsibility. I think yes, there are certain things that the government needs to do, but till they get to that point, the education department or the higher education commission or whoever else, the curriculum wings, I think we all need to play our role. If I am a mother or a sister or a daughter or a teacher or you know whoever I come in touch with,
Right.
if I know something, it's my responsibility to pass on that information to others. And I think teachers are in an excellent position. They get a new set of students every semester. If they know these things, if they are aware
Right.
of what needs to happen, they have this perfect audience.
But like, you know, Safiullah is saying, let's take the example of KPK. If, you know, even if teachers there are educating children around this, they go back to houses where, you know, it's frowned upon. One expects that it'll be frowned upon because they don't agree on reforming the laws to give
Yes.
women that kind of protection. So what
I
happens
always
there?
tell young people that they are very intelligent. They need to start talking to the elders in their families, and they have to create that elbow space for themselves, and they have to start these dialogues with the elders in the family. And I've seen a lot of families where our young people can actually convince others in their families. If a girl is being beaten up at home, and if she goes and starts talking to her mother or whoever she's closest to in the family, and starts creating allies within the family, and then who can go and talk to the father or who can go and talk to the grandparents, I've seen families change. It's important that we start talking about it in a
Vikas,
very
do you think, and
positive
part
way.
of that is happening because of media, because of social media, because of mainstream
Right.
media. It's not something that can be hidden so much anymore.
Right.
People are
Right.
talking about it. Vikas, do you think that's enough? Do you
I-
think expecting children to, you know, granted that will have an impact, going back, having that kind of strength to maybe, you know, understand these things, talk about it, is enough in a society where, like Safiullah is saying, people have opposed these kind of laws in a province categorically, not wanting to give women that protection, which they do enjoy in other provinces?
I guess that will not be enough, as I've earlier said as well, that there has to be a multi-pronged strategy. State has to be very actively, in fact, advocating this issue of domestic violence and violence related to women and men. And the state should tell people that this is violence. First of all, we need to basically tell them that this is something that falls into the umbrella of violence, and
But
then
how will you tell people if you have, you know, it's a circular argument. You can't tell people unless people start, you can form laws unless people start coming and, you know, reporting these crimes. They will not report them if they don't think they will find the justice. So
So
you know,
that's
it's the same.
that's why I was saying that we have to have a more comprehensive and holistic kind of thing. For instance, you have law. So law criminalizes an issue, and on that law there is implementation. And to implement that law, we need to make that law accessible to the people.
Right.
If people are not reporting that, then law will not come into action. So first of all, if we have law, we have to improve the reporting mechanism. Along with that, we have to go with the curriculum that will in fact improve the awareness and the knowledge of the people that
So,
this
of
is-
course,
then
socially
then
we
there
need to
has to
change.
be the role of the community as well. There has to be active community involvement and engagement, and then role of media
But
and the role
community
of
doesn't agree, for
and the role
example.
of media and role of non-governmental organization. Let me tell you one thing here. For instance, if you will look at this issue of domestic violence that we are debating or discussing in this program, non-governmental organizations started working on this issue in Pakistan way back in 90s, and since then it is being considered that it is a Western agenda. But despite all the resistance, all the efforts being made from within, today we are debating. It means that they have been successful in denting the social structure of our country. So change has been made. Change has been introduced. It is not like that change does not come. Change comes, but it is a slow process. So we have to have holistic, for instance, who was considering workplace harassment, sexual harassment, a criminal act before the act was introduced in 2009. So it was the non-governmental organization. As Safiullah was referring time and again to the power structures of our country, I mean, with whom the real power is, and especially that is the religious elite. I mean, despite all their resistance, this sector has been successful in bringing awareness to this issue, and they have been successful in making the government criminalize this issue. I mean, when we were students and we used to march on this avenue that we have to end violence. I mean, girti hui diwar ko ek dhakka aur do. So these type of jargons were being used at that time. So it is not like that change do not come. So in a society there has to be a comprehensive, a circular kind of an approach, and you have to address it on various fronts. One front will not work. And in the context of this idea, we have to make things accessible to the people, that if, for instance, if you're talking about a female reporting this issue of violence against her, so to whom she will be reporting? Because going to police station is considered bad in our society. So we need to change the impression of the police station, or we need to change the reporting mechanism. So because we have the law. So how you will enact that law if the report is not there? For instance, we have 5,000 women dying out of domestic violence in Pakistan, and this is a reported figure. So out of it means that 5,000 have started reporting. So this is a change. So we are on a positive trajectory. We are on an upward trajectory. There is light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to these issues, but the point is we need to make an effort. We need to start somewhere.
Right. Safiullah, do you think we'll come to reform?
I don't agree particularly with everything that has been said, Maruf, and I say so because of the statistics that we have. Now, Human Rights Watch last year reported that 70 to 90% of all Pakistani women have been victims of domestic violence.
At one time or another.
At one time or another. And unfortunately, this figure hasn't improved in the last 30 years. This has consistently been the statistic that we have been following. What I do see is that a very elite bunch of people, educated, who do have access to all sorts of information, have this debate going on. But this is not the debate that we have going on in our villages. And it is very unlikely that this debate will reach our villages. In fact, I'll share with you a statistic from Aurat Foundation, and it was shocking. Aurat Foundation conducted a survey of all the women police stations. Now, women police stations were made solely so that women could go and report there. And they asked the women police officers about the various acts that have been passed. And despite the fact that upon their creation, all women police officers were educated, none of them knew of any of the acts or any of the procedural things that needed to be done. And furthermore, when those women officers were asked what their point of view is on domestic violence, the very same women who were put in place to prevent domestic violence were of the opinion that domestic violence is a domestic issue that husband and wife ought to resolve mutually without their intervention. So this is the mindset because of our culture. And I think this mindset exists strongly because of the religious overtures that we have in our culture. I think the debates that we need to be having right now are very simplistic debates. Perhaps you and I would not debate this, but in a village, we need to sit down and we need to discuss a few things. We need to discuss whether if it is ever okay for a man to chastise his wife or his children or anyone else that he may be able to, a younger brother, a male perhaps. We need to be discussing, for instance, the issue that is a woman's place, is it in the house?
But
or
that has to come, a lot of that will have to do with education also.
Absolutely. So there is education. And there is also, in my opinion, the real place where debates take place within our country, or at least talks take place within our country, and that is the mosque. That is, so at the moment, it is men who are the repository of all knowledge, and they are the ones who frame the issues. They are the ones who talk about what the questions are. They come back to their houses, they tell their women what their verdicts are. And we have a structure which is consistently facilitating this. We have in our minds views
and
that
encouraging you
and
know,
encouraging this.
encouraging hiding it, encouraging, you know, well, it's not really an issue, just, you know, pushing it under the carpet, things will improve, all of that. That's part of our national dialogue.
I'll tell you a legal
know,
thing, for
families.
instance, something that's not afforded by law, but sometimes when we are filing divorce cases, something that we always come across, and there's this usual word that strikes my mind right now, which is a disobedient wife. How a man feels that a wife needs to be obedient to her, but I have never ever in my life seen something that states something along the lines of a disobedient husband or a husband who does not conform to the wishes of the wife. Instead, what I see is that the only grounds for divorce, men have grounds for divorce on a wife simply not listening to her, but a wife needs to be beaten up, needs to be threatened, needs to be financially deprived before she can go to the courts and ask for a divorce or an end to a dissolution of the marriage.
Right.
So once again, I'll come back to the question. I do not believe that legislations are lacking. There is absolutely no doubt about the fact. We even have the international legislation, CEDAW, the Convention of Discrimination Against Women, that has been ratified by our parliament. This is more than what a lot of countries in the world already have. The legislation exists. The real problem is the mindset that we have towards women. There is a lot of objectification of women, a large history where we believe that women were to be treated as, for instance, war booty, chattel, and where women were just taken in as spoils of war.
Right.
And those very heroes who have done so have been glorified time and again. We see their glorification in our history books, we see their glorification in our Islamiyat books. And until and unless we start to decide, and women themselves, of course, also need to decide what their place in the society is, whether they actually want to become serving members of the society, or if they are in fact all right with the structure. There is in fact that entire idea as well. There are women who consistently side with the other side of the narrative.
Right. And it's
so
not just men. And like you
it's not
said, you
just
know,
men.
the
And
women
then-
in police stations
and
also, a
then-
lot of them felt it was all
And
right.
then this issue boils down to their economic independence.
Yes.
They are not
Yeah.
So it's all interlinked,
economically
really.
independent, so they have to rely
they don't
on.
feel they have a
So
choice.
they don't have the choice to decide. They don't have the choice to decide on their own that with whom they are going to side with. So in this connection, we have to empower them.
By the way, you know, before I close, Malia, I'm sure, you know this better than I do, that there are a lot of women who, even though they might have that blanket of financial stability, still feel that, you know, they can't step out and sort of, you know, come out and speak against this kind of
Yes, and again, it boils down to, you know, living in a patriarchal system. Women themselves are very strong patriarchs, and they have to protect the system. They are expected to by the society. So, you know, if she believes that she is a good mother or a good wife, she'll make sure that she teaches her daughters certain things, and he teaches her sons certain things, so that she is considered to be a good mother and a good woman. So I think it's high time both men and women start looking at themselves as human beings rather than men and women, and, you know, looking at their different status in the society of the higher status of men and the lower status of women. So
And stop
having more
accepting it
conversations.
so
Yes, and one point that I really wanted to make was that having laws and using laws is one thing, but, you know, when we have laws that are addressing social issues, it's very important that we first try and understand what the issues are. Unless and until we break the myths around those issues and have a very clear conceptual clarity on what the issue is, having a law won't really make much of a difference.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Malia Hussain, thank you for your time. Bakar Salim, thank you for being with us. Barrister Safiullah Ghori, thank you for joining us. Of course, as far as abuse is concerned, whether it's abuse, domestic abuse, or any other kind of abuse about, you know, on women is concerned, it has to be a concentrated effort from all segments of society. We need not just a social outcry, but we need a legal system that is accessible. We need a society that works together. We need a media that understands that this kind of a problem needs to be talked about and also, you know, told about in a positive light. We don't just need to see suffering women who are crying, but we need to see them come out of this abuse so that a positive message is sent to all generations, so they can see that there is a life beyond that kind of abuse. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.